All right, welcome back to Adobe Lightroom Classic, and today we're going to take a look at the rest of the items over here in the Develop module. And remember, these are all global adjustments, and global adjustments affect your whole image. So I brought up a new image, and before we close this basic panel, the one thing I want to go over is I do want to do an auto white balance, and I think that looks a little bit better. I can't tell exactly because it's a little bit dark. Now, normally I could come in here and just adjust this slider over to brighten this up, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at the tone curve so we can do that there as well. So we're going to come up here and we're going to then close that basic panel. And before we go away, you should always do your profile and your white balance for every single image, no matter what. If you don't end up having to change it, that's fine, but you should always take a look at that. That's one of the most important things that you can do, especially if you're shooting indoors and you have this kind of nasty yellow light that we see here. Watch what will happen if we just simply do a color balance. It's going to make it a whole lot better. Is this perfect? No. Can I adjust it a little bit more to get it more exact or accurate? Absolutely. But white balance is something that you need to do to every single image that you use in Lightroom. All right, we're going to close this just so it's easier to look at. And I'm going to open up the tone curve. Inside the tone curve, there are two different things here. One is what comes up by default. It's called the parametric curve. And then this one right here in the white that we see right here is point curve. So we have the parametric curve and the point curve. They both are doing the exact same thing. It's just how they work is a little bit different. The parametric curve's been up here forever and I hate it, but I'll show you how it works. And it works actually exactly like the point curve. So you've got the curve here, but you're actually not coming in and adjusting the curve. What you can do is you come down here to the slider. So this is highlights. So if you want to brighten your highlights, and you'll notice that the curve is now curved up here because this is your highlight area. This is your shadow area. This is your midtone area. So if you slide it over, it makes the curve for you. If you wanted to darken them, you'd come this way and it would darken those areas. Then we have the lights. So we can brighten the image or darken the image. In this case, maybe we want to brighten it a little bit. And then we have the darks, and you can see this is affecting your midtones as well. This is affecting that whole curve. So we'll come in here and we can brighten this up until we think it looks better. And then we have our shadows. And as we adjust that, it affects just the shadow area of the curve. In this case, we want to kind of open that up a little bit so we can see this image a little bit better. So you can see this is our parametric curve. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hold that Alt option and hit reset up here so we can get that back to normal. And then we're going to click on the point curve. So the point curve actually has 4 different options. You can work here, and in this section, you are adjusting the red, the green, and the blue channels. Here, you're working in the red channel, the green channel only, the blue channel only. For 99% of what people are going to do, you're going to work in all the channels. It's actually useful to use the channels, but I use it for color adjustments, not for brightness adjustments. Now, the way this works here is notice there's no sliders. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to work directly with the curve. And this is exactly the same that you would use if you worked in Photoshop. The 2 main ways to adjust images in Photoshop are levels and curves. And I prefer curve because it has more adjustability. So just like before, this area right here is our highlights. This is our shadows. In this area in here is our midtones. And the way this works is really easy. You come up to the point, click and hold, and then you grab it and you can slide it. So going to the left is brightening your highlights. Going down is darkening your highlights. Come down here to this slider. If we go up, it's flattening our image out, lowering the contrast and increasing the contrast. And this is why I like this one a little bit better, because in the parametric curve, it just kind of picks a general area. In the point curve, you can click a point wherever you want. So I can click and add a point, and I can slide that point anywhere along this line. And if this is the area that I want to adjust, I can lift this up to brighten it or drop it down to darken it. In this case, I want to brighten it. And I want to brighten this area up a little bit more as well. Now, when you do this, you don't want to set like a million points and have some crazy curve that goes like this. You don't want that. That's going to look like crap. You can see it looks weird like that. Usually when you're using this, you only want a couple of points. So we'll come in here and we're going to brighten this up a little bit. And usually at most, I might set one secondary point where I'm kind of adjusting the shadows as well. So you just have this slow, gradual curve. And look, if you need to do more, this is where using selective adjustments. You might not get this perfect, but the idea is just to make a subtle curve to adjust your image. Doing the exact same thing. Could you do this in the basic panel? Absolutely. Could you do this with the parametric curve? Absolutely. And I'll just come in here and show you how this works. So if you click on the red channel, I'm just going to grab it from the center, but you'll notice this is kind of reddish and this is kind of cyanish. So if we go up, it's going to make it more red. If we go down, it's going to make it more cyan. And what the curve allows you to do is kind of do everything in one little step. Where we could adjust the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows in the main channels, we can go into the individual channels to actually color correct. So if you have a little bit of a color cast, you can adjust that here. And if you want to get rid of a point, you can just right click it and say delete control point, and that point is going to be gone. All right, so that is how you use the tone curve. We'll go ahead and close that, and we'll slide on down here to HSL color. And what this does is let you change a couple of different things. The hue, which is the color of the color, meaning you're changing the color. So let me go to blue since we can see this blue right here. So I'm going to adjust the blue color. You can see how I'm changing that a little bit. So I'm changing the color of that blue. We've got saturation, which is the intensity of the color. So I could make blues more gray or more vibrant. So we're increasing the saturation. And then we have luminance. And luminance is brightness. So I can make the blues brighter or I can make the blues darker. Okay. And you can do that for every one of these different color channels that we see right here. In all, it's doing the exact same thing. It's just letting you see everything at once. So here we were just seeing the hue, just seeing the saturation or the luminance. But if you wanted to see everything at once, you can click on that. And since I have a bigger screen, it makes it a little bit easier. So I can come in here and say, oh, I don't really like that color red. So let me desaturate some of the orange. And I'm going to desaturate a little bit of the red so it's not so intense. I'm going to shift the red over and make it a little bit more yellow. So that's what I'm doing. Can you guys see this on the screen? I don't know if you could tell what I just did, but I did subtly adjust the color. I actually love HSL color. My only issue is that it works globally. You can't do it in a specific area. So if you do it in one area and then you have something over here where you didn't really want it, you're kind of screwed. And this is not really available in the selective adjustments. They have a very simplified version of it. So that's HSL color. It's very, very helpful. We have color grading. And so color grading is something that you see in cinema. So if anybody's ever watched a Marvel movie, you've seen color grading, you just might not have known about it. Just like before, we can adjust in these 3-wheel panels. We can click to just see the shadows, just see the midtones, and just see the highlights. Or we can come down here and do this globally. In my case, I tend to like this. When I color grade, I'm usually doing what we call a split tone. I don't really use the midtones. I usually am using the highlights and the shadow areas down here. So what I'm going to do is just do a simple one. I'm going to add this darker color for the shadows, and that's putting this color in the shadows. And then I'm going to put in a lighter orange-ish yellow in the highlights, and there's my split tones. So we're getting the orangish color in the highlights, blue color in the shadows. Then down here we have blending, and this is just changing the intensity of those colors, how much of that we're adding to it, and then balance. So if I want it to shift over more blue, so it's more of the shadow color and just a little bit of the highlight, or I could do the opposite where we're doing that. You can shift this around depending on how you want that blend to happen. So I don't actually want this in this image for right now. So what I'm going to do is, if you notice right up here, we've got these little switches. I'm actually going to click that switch and turn that off so that's not affecting our image. And you'll notice you can do that with any one of these little sliders right here. The next thing that we have is sharpening, and by default, Lightroom is automatically sharpening our image, which is okay, but I actually prefer to do this on output only. So I'm going to disable that. But if you do want to add sharpening, you can come in here, you can add some sharpening. These are just the default settings. You can move those around. If we want to change the detail, we can do that. I'm not a big fan of Lightroom sharpening. I prefer to do it in Photoshop because it's much more accurate. But if it's something that you just are using Lightroom, feel free to do that. This isn't going to make an image that you photographed out of focus sharp again. Sharpening was devised because most cameras use an anti-aliasing filter to help reduce noise. Well, reducing noise also makes the image a little bit out of focus. Sharpening actually increases the contrast. What we're looking at is edge contrast. So right here in this hat where it's dark and this is light, right there on that edge, it's making the pixel on this side brighter and the pixel on this side darker. And it's giving the effect or the illusion that that line is now sharper. You can increase the radius. So the radius is wider. It's going to do that a couple pixels this way and a couple pixels this way. Detail is just, of course, bringing out more detail. It's almost like increasing sharpening. Now, sharpening, the amount that you add is going to be dependent on the size of your image. If you have a 24 megapixel image and a 50 megapixel image, and we'll assume they were both exactly the same, the 50 megapixel is going to need more sharpening to do the exact same thing to it than the 24 megapixel image. The trick with sharpening, and the reason I don't actually use it here, is that you should always sharpen your image as the last thing that you do. And most images eventually are going to be exported to a specific size. If you sharpen here, it's not really benefiting you too much. You should sharpen on the export because it's applying sharpening to how you size your image, which makes a huge difference. I'm not going to really go into it anymore. If you get into Photoshop or other things, it's easier to see in that circumstance. But in my case, I never sharpen in Lightroom. I use the export module, meaning that if you come up here, there's no save. If you go to export, you'll notice right here, it's got output sharpening. And so you just have some basic little things that you can put, but it sharpens per your export versus the image before it's been sized. But we'll just hit cancel and we'll go ahead and get down to noise reduction. Noise reduction is very simple. It's just like it sounds. If you have an image that you shoot at a high ISO and you're starting to get noise, you can simply come in here and add luminance noise reduction to it. And I don't actually use any of these other things right here. I just slide this luminance value. I don't usually go past 20 because that's going to make the image too soft, but it actually does work extremely well. So you can reduce your noise by sliding that little slider. And before we close the detail, I wanted to mention one little thing because I didn't do it in some of these other ones here. But a lot of these, when you open and close them, they have this triangle. But within this area, there's another triangle. And what that means is there's something else inside of it. I just like to take a moment to say the YouTube algorithm really likes it when you watch the whole video, you like the video, and you comment on the video. If you're finding the information in any of these videos helpful, if you could please give me a thumbs up, that would be wonderful. If you would like to subscribe and get future videos as they come up, because I'm going to be doing a whole series on Lightroom right here, that would be great as well. So come down to lens correction, and there's two different ways to do this. You can run a profile, meaning you can basically pick your camera. So I can come over here and enable, and it's automatically seeing or recognizing what this camera was shot with. So you can see this is a NEF file, which means Nikon. So this was shot with a Nikon. It was shot with this model camera and this lens, and it's automatically applying the profile that's associated with this camera and that lens to it to fix what I will show you in a second. And if you want to add remove chromatic aberration, you can do that as well. So we're going to go ahead and click on manual, and now you'll see it. So if you don't want to use the auto profile, you can come in here and you can control this. So this is changing distortion, so you can see how it's warping the image. This is only usually helpful when you're doing architectural photography, because we use 35mm cameras where you cannot swing the backs like in old cameras. This is where this is helpful unless you have some sort of a shift lens. We've got a little constrained crop where it's going to keep it in proportion to the crop that we see here. So we can defringe, meaning what this does is on your edges right here where they get fuzzy, sometimes they have purplish or bluish little cast to it. So that's what these adjustments are for right here. So you can learn to adjust these. I rarely use this because I don't run into it as being a big problem. And in some cameras, when you shoot really wide, you start to see that the camera automatically vignettes. So you can come down here and change that vignetting. And in this case, you could actually use it to add a vignette as well, if that's something that you wanted to do. But in this case, we can change the midpoint. The midpoint just adjusts where that vignetting starts. Do you want the vignetting to start here, or do you want it to start here? So this is something that you really need to come in here and play with. But just in general, if you're learning Lightroom for the first time, this is most helpful for architectural photography. So if I click on this, you'll notice that there's sort of a slight bow. So if we come in here and we click on this and we click this button, you can see how that straightened it. Let me uncheck it. See how it's trying to straighten and fix those lines? That's what I mean by architectural photography and what it's trying to work on. And click that, we'll shut that down. Next thing that we have down here is transform. And transform has to do a lot with what I just talked about in lens correction. It's still working on fixing issues that you see in architectural photography. So we can click on auto and it's going to try to auto align. And what is it doing? Well, it's doing this, right? So it's adjusting that. Horizontally, you can adjust it. You can rotate your image from when if it's crooked a little bit, the aspect ratio, the scale, offset, Y. So auto is doing this all by itself. And then we have some other options where we're using, and these are also kind of like a semi-automatic mode where you're using guided level, where it's affecting mostly the level, the vertical, just trying to make this completely vertical, which looks really wonky, and full. In that case, it tried to make it look perfect, but it also looked really weird. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and turn that off. And just like before, you can come in here and manually adjust this as well. I don't think this is the most helpful thing to beginning students, but if you're really into architectural photography, minor adjustments, let me specify this, minor adjustments can benefit an image. Go ahead and close that off. We're going to come down here to effects. So in under effects, remember I talked about vignetting a second ago. So here we're going to use this. And this is something I use a lot. So you can add that darker edge. This is good for, making a portrait look a little bit better. It kind of focuses your attention on the center portion of it. Midpoint is just changing where that vignetting starts. Roundness is, do you want it to be more of, and let me do this a lot, a round vignette or more of a square vignette? So the feather is how soft it and how far it bleeds out. So we'll make this hard to soft, okay? And then how we affect the highlight. Once again, I'm going to hold that Alt or Option. I'm going to reset that and take it back to the beginning. And then the last thing we have is calibration, and is a way to correct colors that don't look right. A camera interpolates what it thinks the color should be, and sometimes it gets it wrong. So the way you can come in here is slide these sliders. So tint, and we had tint available before. This is going to be adding magenta, so we can shift it towards the green or the magenta. Then we can go to red and we can adjust the reds in the camera so that the reds are more accurate. And reds are one of those ones that a lot of times when you take a picture of like a red dress, it comes out neon. Here's a good place where you can fix it. Could you do it in the HSL color? Yep. It's just a different bunch of sliders that affects things a little bit differently. And then you can affect the green and you can affect the blue. And you have the color and the saturation of the color. And you can make things look super saturated or unrealistic as well as trying to make them look accurate. And that's the rest of the options that you have inside of the global develop module inside Adobe Lightroom. In the next video, you're going to love, because in that video, we're going to come up here and we're going to take a look at some AI and how to make selections. And selections would be, in this case, we'll go ahead and do one real quick so you can see. We're going to hit select sky. It's automatically going to make a selection of the sky using artificial intelligence. And then that's going to allow me to come in here and adjust just the sky and nothing else. Now that is called a selective adjustment. We do have a Facebook group, and there's a very specific reason I created this. If you want the information, it's in the description below. But a lot of comments I get, people are asking me questions and I cannot help them because I need to see what the issue is. Facebook allows you to either post an image or a video, and it makes it really easy for me to give you the answer to whatever your problem is.